5 different ways. And most people, about a third of the population, can do that no problem. About a third of the population can be coached to see that. Art Bell was one of those guys who, if you coached him, if you said, okay, now do this and flip it that way, Art could see those things. About a third of the population doesn't. So to some extent, I understand why people have difficulty with seeing some of these things, because not everybody just immediately gets it. But there is definitely structure here. And again, as we get down to the bottom, this stuff follows the local vertical. It doesn't follow the film grain. It follows the terrain. And that, to me, was the biggest test. And one of the big reasons I wanted to get involved with Richard was when I started to see that, I started to realize, oh my God, I think this guy is right about this stuff. Now, one of the really interesting things, all those pictures I just showed you are from the Apollo 14 landing site. If you look at the Apollo landing sites, they were pretty well spread out. Here's Apollo 11 over there. Have to be done when? I don't know. Here's the Apollo 11 landing site, which was basically in the middle of nowhere. You've got Apollo 17 way up here, 15, 16, and this all makes sense if you want to get a very diverse geological evaluation of the moon, of what's really going on the moon. But notice that Apollo 12 and 14 are practically on top of each other. They're only 114 miles apart. So I don't know what, if you're looking for rocks, you're going to get the same rocks in those two places. It's very bizarre why they're so close. 45 minutes, great, okay. Also, Apollo 12 landed in the same spot as Surveyor 3, and we'll get into some of the stuff on Surveyor 3 later. But one of the cool things that they did is that they took pictures at both landing sites. Now on Apollo 12, there's a film called Pinpoint for Science, because the exercise that they were conducting was, can we find something as small as a Surveyor spacecraft, which is about as big as, this small area here, and land right next to it. So they did that on Apollo 12. But over here, so what we did is we took a frame grab from this film, a 16-millimeter film of Apollo 12, motion picture film, and compared that with the still frame photography, slide photography from Apollo 14. And guess what? The exact same diagonal structure appears in both images. So you've got two landing sites near each other where you can see the same structures over the horizon on two completely different types of film media. So again, I think wherever this stuff is, these big diagonal features, they're either out here somewhere or out there somewhere. Now, all I've got to do at some point, and this is on my list of things to do, is find out the landing sites, again, find out what the orientation of the camera was when they took those pictures, and just doubly confirm that they were looking in the same spot. And I'm going to guarantee you that they were looking in the same direction, and they were seeing the same big, gigantic structures beyond the horizon. Okay, here's a close-up of, actually taken from another frame. I think this is Apollo 16, of something similar. And we put this in the book because, to me, basically we're talking about scaffolding on the moon. Now, I can look at this because I'm trained to do it, and I can see all kinds of layers to this. I mean, I see basically a sheet going this way, and then this box structure sticks out to my eyes. You've got stuff going along here. You've got reinforcing stuff coming across that way. Intercostals, you've got stuff here, you've got this stuff. These are not scratches. They're way above the level of many scratches. They don't look anything like true film scratches. And I can see layers going this way, up and down. And to me, this is just astonishing. When Richard showed me this for the first time, my mouth just dropped open. Because to me, this is all engineering. Now, the question comes back to glass. It doesn't make a lot of sense to most people's way of thinking that you would build stuff on the moon out of glass, because glass shatters easily. But the truth is, glass only shatters easily on the Earth. And the reason it shatters easily on the Earth is because we cannot make glass without getting moisture in it. On the moon, there's no moisture. And what happens is that when you make glass with no moisture and you make it in a vacuum environment, it is actually stronger than steel. So the reality is, if you're going to build structures on the moon to protect yourself from meteorites, the perfect material is glass. In fact, what they're talking about now with Bush's new space program is actually, guess what? Building the structures, the protective structures, out of glass. They're in fact going to use the glass that's already on the moon because they figure there's no moisture in it. They're going to process it and make it there. An architect named Robert Fiertek went through and he put together a bunch of these images, and he looked and did all this point sourcing and plugged everything into a CAD program, and this is what it spit out. So this, we think, is what we're talking about on the moon. It's basically a giant scaffolding type of structure. It's probably in some places as much as 20 miles high. Now, I can't believe I did this, but there's a great picture that's in the book that I forgot to put in my presentation that was taken by Apollo 15, and it shows the moon as they were looking back at the moon. And again, we overexposed it, and you can see what looks like an air glow around the moon. Now, on the Earth, we have what's called the air glow limb, which is basically the atmosphere of the planet, and you can see that above the actual physical horizon. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere, but in this picture, there's only two explanations. Either the moon does have an atmosphere, and that's what they saw in this picture, or there really are these gigantic sort of semi-transparent glass structures on the moon. Here's one last shot that I really like. This is one that was actually pilfered off the desk of the director of NASA in 1972, and it wasn't James Webb at that point. It was another guy. But a reporter friend of Richard's was in there for a meeting. The director was called out of the office for some reason, and he started looking through the pictures on the guy's desk, and he found this. And again, this is Mare Crisium. You've got a sort of partially covered crater here. You've got this bizarre little spiky thing sticking up, and in the close-ups you can actually see there's it looks like supports coming in to support this towering thing. Again, it's several miles high, and on the official version of this image now on all the NASA websites, that thing is not there. But I trust this more than I trust what's on the NASA websites. Okay, probably the most important thing that Ken actually had in his collection was this. It was a reproduction of a patch, original patch of the Apollo program. And on that patch you see the Earth, you see the launch from Cape Canaveral, a little path going to the moon, you see the moon, that's supposed to be Apollo's face, I think. But the weird thing is that inside this A is the constellation of Orion. Now, Orion in the mythology has nothing to do with Apollo. Apollo and Orion are basically completely separate in terms of Greek mythology. Orion is only significant in the Egyptian mythology. So here's Orion. It's the most obvious, brightest constellation in the sky. The belt stars are very famous. Of course, I was looking at them last night while we were watching fireworks up in Albuquerque. And to the Egyptians, Orion was the place where their greatest god, Osiris, resided. Now, Osiris was the Egyptian god of death, resurrection, judgment. He was basically their top guy. A lot of his characteristics were later borrowed, some people say, for Jesus Christ in the Christian theology. But basically, Orion and Osiris were inseparable in terms of the Egyptian stellar religion, the astrology that the Egyptians operated on. They essentially they were so important that they took the belt stars and basically recreated them, mirrored them on the surface at the Giza Plateau with the three great pyramids. The relationship between those pyramids and the Nile was set up to duplicate the relationship between the Milky Way and Orion's belt. At least that's what some people, Robert Bauval, Graham Hancock, Adrian Gilbert, believe, and I think absolutely that they're correct. There also was one other object that was very sacred to the Egyptians, and that was the star of Sirius, which is sort of a companion that follows Orion through the night sky. Now, Sirius represented, it's called the dog star commonly. It is called the dog star primarily because it resides in Canis Major, which is a constellation that's thought by some people to appear to be a dog. And as far as the Egyptians, one other thing I wanted to put in there. Basically, they're companions. Wherever you see Orion, generally you see Sirius right afterwards. I was really interested in Faraz's presentation earlier. She had some tarot cards up there, and the very first tarot card, I believe, and I'm not an expert, is the Fool. And immediately when I saw the Fool, I realized that this was supposed to be representing Sirius and Orion. And something important, something esoteric, something important about them. The dog there represents Sirius. This is Orion. I had to flip it around because in the Fool, it's backwards. But, you know, I think that's definitely what's going on. If you watch the Indiana Jones movie, where they have the Nazca lines in the movie, and they show this big spider on the ground, and one of the spider has this one leg that goes way, way over. Again, that's Orion and Sirius. So even the Peruvian culture, the Incas, whoever built those Nazca lines, also understood there was something really, really significant and important about Orion and Sirius and their relationship. Anyway, Sirius represents Isis in the stellar religion. This is the wife and consort of Osiris, his constant companion, the mother of his child Horus. Her hieroglyph is an equilateral triangle, which was kind of interesting because it seemed to match up with the tetrahedral motif of Sidonia. And Sirius, in fact, is pretty interesting. It's a double star system. It's a binary. This is Sirius A and Sirius B. This is actually the only picture, I believe, of the two of them together that you can see from Earth. And again, they were they were inseparable. Isis and Sirius meant the same thing to the Egyptians. The sun was Horus, and he was represented frequently by the falcon god, or the falcon-headed god, as